then this time, of course, it is my pleasure, but at the same time, I should be beginning by thanking you for agreeing to talk to the Korean citizens, because there is so much that they would wish to hear from you, because you are in a position to share what is happening in Washington, D.C. With Korean citizens who are basically a lot interested in what is happening in Washington, D.C. So you are visiting Korea at a very opportune time.
Thank you. It is. It's always a pleasure, and for me, it's always significant to visit South Korea and to visit Seoul and to see good friends and colleagues in and out of government, some of whom I've known for a very long time. As I remarked earlier this morning, I think we are living through a transformational period in many different respects that create anxiety, that bring with it huge amounts of change, but I think also reason to be optimistic about the future, as uncertain as it is. And I'm delighted to try to offer a few perspectives.
So let me start with the first question, which is, you already spoke a lot about transformation taking place in the world. And then one of the things which worries a lot of Koreans, you would have noticed it, is the collapse of rule-based international order. That is to say, rule of law giving its way to rule of power. And I think I should be explaining to you why rule of law is so important for Koreans, because they suffered very, very badly. Because of rule of power. Well, examples would be the loss of national sovereignty for 36 years, and the Korean War, when we lost 3 million lives, when the whole Korean population at the time, both in South and North Korea, was 30 million. So we lost 10% of our whole population at the time. That's what power politics mean for Korea. So you just called it transformation, age of transformation. And then among other things, what we are losing, that is to say rule-based international order, that in fact is causing a lot of concern for Koreans. So what would you tell Koreans about that?
Well, the first thing I would say, Ambassador, is that personally I share the concern and anxiety. I have worked and lived throughout my life in a world that was built, to your point, on an architecture, a set of understandings, norms, and values that, taken together after the end of World War II and the Korean War, a rules-based international order, to use your phrase. And I believe that has served the world and the United States very well in this period. But we are seeing that, I would use the word eroding, not collapsed. And what is in part unsettling about what has happened over the last number of years is the very country that arguably more than any other, that was responsible for creating this rules-based post-World War II era, has been the one at the forefront of disrupting that order. And that has unsettled many and created a significant amount of off-balance. And the question, I think, which I tried to explain in my remarks earlier today, is that rather than wishing for a different America, something for which no country outside of the United States has really any influence over. As it with many things in life, Ambassador, the question is, what do countries around the world, to include Korea, focus on that they control, and to recognize what is within their purview, that they can leverage, they can utilize, and they can prioritize to generate at a national level more assurances of security and prosperity. But it is not, and I believe this deeply, simply only about Korea. There are a growing number of significant powers and countries around the world. Focus on the quote-unquote middle powers, not the United States, not China, not Russia, but powers that have tremendous capability, that have strategic location, and how do you generate more partnership? Reliance on the United States for the next 80 years will bring clearly some benefits, but I think the field of vision for Korea needs to be wider than just the United States.
Well, Rexon, I just listened to you, and then one of the messages you are trying to share with us would be this, which is that don't try to spend too much time on, trying to guess what will happen in US politics. It, in fact, is out of your power. So instead, just try to understand what is happening and then try to adjust yourself to what is happening in the US politics. So I understand the point, but at the same time, I think there are still a large number of people in the United States who think that US leadership in maintaining rule of law, that in fact is not only good for the world.
Not only good.
Not only
That's
good
right.
for the world, but
That's
also
right.
for the United States
That's right.
as well.
That's right.
Examples would be, for example, Stephen Walt or Hal Brands. They write a lot of things. They are quote-unquote realists. And those realists, they are saying, well, rule of law, that in fact helps United States. So
Does.
United States must continue reassert its leadership. So that in fact is something we hope to see. I mean, we don't have influence. I mean, as Koreans, we don't
Sure.
have influence. But at the same time, when I read those writings
That's
by
right.
Stephen Walt or Hal Brands, then I get encouraged.
That's right. But many people have said, and I will, borrow the line. Hope is not a strategy. You are right, Ambassador, and I believe deeply, not just about the United States and South Korea, but to your point about the benefits that the United States derives from a rules-based order. Right? There are many leading politicians. Many elected officials in the United States who fundamentally share that view, which is why I said,
including Marco Rubio.
including Marco Rubio, including some in the current administration, certainly including many other elected Republican officials and Democrats. There's also, I think, deep foundational strength in the U.S.-South Korea relationship and partnership, alliance, and support for it in the United States. So we will have more elections. We have one coming up later this year. We will have another presidential election,
Right.
and there will be political change, which is why I said, we will see change in rhetoric, in tone, and action, and probably, if I had to predict, change that swings closer to the middle than what we have witnessed over the last 18 months.
Right.
But I also think underneath that return to more normalcy reflects some structural changes that I believe countries around the world, to include our closest allies, need to anticipate and prepare for.
Of course. Right. So that in fact would be leading to my third question,
Sure.
which is how Korea should be responding and adapting itself to those changes taking place in the United States. And personally, I said myself, there should be two national objectives. One, we must be further strengthen, quote-unquote, self-reliance. And self-reliance not only in military capability, but more importantly, in technology and economy.
That's right.
And then you said many nice things about technological progress that Korea has made. But at the same time, I think we have to make further efforts.
Absolutely.
That's one national objective. Another national objective would be further strengthening relations with like-minded countries, and then build a new architecture which should be multi-layered. So one important layer would have to continue to be Korea-US alliance.
That's right.
But at the same time, there should be other layers of relationship between Korea and other partners and allies of the United States in the region, like Japan, like Australia, like the Philippines. And then third, there is something called lattice type of arrangement, which in fact President Biden has been trying to build up in the Indo-Pacific, like Quad, like Korea, US, Japan. And then that, in fact, would be very helpful, but at the same time, there is IP4 as well. So these would be multi-layered, and we should be trying to further strengthen our relations with quote-unquote like-minded countries. And what, in fact, is encouraging for me is those like-minded countries, they also appreciate and understand the importance of rule of law. Japan, Australia, Philippines, Canada, they all understand the importance of European countries. So they all understand the importance of rule of law. So we must be further strengthening our relationship with them bilaterally, plurilaterally, multilaterally. So these are the two national objectives you should be pursuing. So I was just listening to you, and then you were saying self-reliance doesn't mean standing by yourself.
That's right.
And I totally agree with you. But I think on the one hand, self-reliance, but on the other hand, multi-layered, say, new architecture of Korea's security and economy. That's my personal thinking, and I will appreciate your comments.
Ambassador, I think I agree 100% with what you've laid out. I'd probably say two things. You mentioned the multi-layered lattice work strategy.
One layer.
Right, but you stack layers on top of each other, right? And that was clearly part of the strategy of the last U.S. administration, which I think is the right approach for American interests. But there's no stopping a country like Korea from pursuing a similar strategy with or without the United States. And maybe the U.S. participates in some, but you don't need America to prompt this kind of initiative by South Korea. You should do it on your own. You should think of the rationale to create groupings and mini-laterals, not just in the Indo-Pacific, but across regions. What grouping makes sense with leading European countries? What grouping makes sense with leading countries of the quote-unquote global South, right? Let's not overlook countries like Brazil, Mexico,
Turkey,
Turkey,
Brazil,
right? There's nothing to stop South Korea from assuming a more present and visible global leadership. And that leads me to my second point on sort of the security lens of South Korea, which I think you would agree, Ambassador, for years, if not decades, has largely been focused on the peninsula. And successive American administrations, I was part of some of them, have carefully tried to urge South Korea to broaden this lens of security. And you have carefully calibrated over time, but it's been very cautious. And I would urge my friends in South Korea to think hard about the lens and the frame of security that matters. The Iran war is a harsh reminder.
Of course. Right.
And I believe that in the decades to come, this question of what impacts security of South Korea will fundamentally be answered at the global level, at the regional level, but not by itself at the level of the peninsula.
Right. Thank you, Rexon. So let me raise this question, which would be focused upon the United States, which is, well, we already spoke about the United States giving up rule-based international order, or moving away from rule-based international order. And in a sense, it is not as supportive of its allies as it used to be. But still, it's amazing in the sense that 80% of Koreans, they firmly support the alliance between Korea and United States. And personally, I ask myself why. And I think it is to a large extent, it is because of extended deterrence United States offers to Korea. And then, North Korean nuclear weapons, that's an existential threat. And then Koreans understand the only practical way we could be dealing with that would be extended deterrence from the United States. So that's there, but at the same time, many Koreans understand, in comparison with what United States offers NATO, then it is still underdeveloped. And I think that is the reason why, well, back in 2023, I guess, in April 2023, then pitching out two countries, then we started something called NCG, Nuclear Consultative Group. But now, after about 3 years, my personal observation is it's stalled. NCG is not progressing at all. And I think it should be reaching at least a level par with NATO, which means we should have operational plan and we should have annual training. And it is very, very far from there. And then it is not moving in that direction. So I'm personally concerned. Is my concern justified?
I think it's a short answer, Ambassador. I think your concern is justified. And my own view is I think that friends and colleagues in Korea should continue to push and should continue to lay out not simply the concern as an anxiety or as a demand, but as a deep need of mutual interest to the United States and South Korea. I would also second urge my friends here in South Korea to engage American counterparts within a wider context of what, to my point, what an alliance of equal or increasingly normal, two normal countries with normal military power, standard power projection capabilities, more on equal footing. How should we be talking about this? That's a very different conversation than even a few years ago. And the Washington, is it the Washington Understanding, if I recall the name correctly, I think was a reflection of the facts of the 2020s versus the facts of the 1980s or the 1990s, and I think you need to continue to engage and encourage, but in this wider context of how South Korea continues to meet its own security needs.
So Rex, let me move on to China. And then as I already said, and then as you already said earlier today, then of course at the very, very important layer should be Korea-US alliance. So I totally agree with you. But at the same time, China is a very important neighbor for us.
Absolutely.
For geopolitical reasons as well as geo-economic reasons, increasingly so. And then the problem we have between Korea and China is this, which is that, well, again, let me get back to rule of law. And China, in fact, these days talk a lot about rule of law. But at the same time, when it comes to practice, then, it is far from rule of law. And one good example would be many incidents we have in the Yellow Sea. And then, for example, we have something called fisheries agreement between Korea and China. And then our EEZs, exclusive economic zones, they overlap with each other.
Yes.
So when we concluded the fisheries agreement between the two countries, we in fact agreed upon something called the Provisional Maritime Zone, PMZ.
Yes.
And then we said in the PMZ, we are not going to do anything other than fishery. Now, what is happening is that China is building artificial structures in that zone, PMZ. And then that, in fact, is something we have seen in South China Sea.
We have,
right?
Very much so.
So we should be, in a sense, responding vigorously against what China is doing there. And then that again is where the rule of law will help us. The law of the sea, as well as bilateral fisheries agreement, where the rule of law would help us. That again is another reason why I say, well, the relationship with China is very important, but at the same time, we should be basing our position, foreign and security policy, upon rule of law. And then that, in fact, is the reason why each time I have an opportunity to speak to the Chinese public, then I encourage them for their own, say, larger role in the global affairs, for which China is a lot interested. You have to understand why United States, in fact, has been behind rule of law. that will help you, China, to play a bigger role globally. So that, in fact, is something I just try to share with the Chinese public. And again, as you said, we cannot really influence Chinese policy. But at the same time, at least I try to tell to Chinese, opinion leaders who, in fact, I hope would understand. But at the same time, I still believe the rule of law is very important in Korea's relationship with United States as well as with China. And when United States gives the impression of moving away from rule of law, then of course it will become that much more difficult for me to tell Chinese, look at what Americans are doing. That's a kind of dilemma.
Ambassador, you very articulately laid out, I think, a dilemma. Very hard to provide, clear, neat, satisfying answers. Power has always been a feature of global politics, even in the last 80 years. I mean, America exercises power, and we have historically around the world in ways that have contravened the rules-based international order well before, Donald Trump became president the first time. And I remember some of those instances related to Iraq quite well. So, this type of challenge is not new. And, I think rules-based international order can be buttressed by many countries, but it's also buttressed by power. The challenges in disputed maritime areas, whether it's with South Korea or with Japan, who face very similar type challenges from Chinese Coast Guard.
Of course.
A Chinese Coast Guard that looks increasingly like a Navy. These are not new. And I think you're right that rules, norms can constrain certain actions. They create parameters of behavior. And we still need those. But I also think, confronted with the facts as they are, a country like South Korea, in facing these kinds of things, needs to widen, as I said, and as others, including John Hamre, have said, that you need a wider set of partners. Partners who aren't just sort of committed rhetorically, but committed practically, meaningfully.
Exactly. So, I will have to raise at least one question about North Korea.
Okay, yes.
And North Korea, in fact, is giving the impression of enjoying far more enhanced status with respect to its military capability, with its foreign policy, even its economic situation, after its commitment of weapons and then soldiers to the war in Ukraine. And then several weeks ago, then President Xi came to visit Pyongyang once again. So all of that is giving that impression. But I think that impression is, in effect, is having impact in Washington, D.C., where then increasing number of people are saying, denuclearization of North Korea, there is no chance. So we should be changing it from denuclearization to arms control. Even there was an editorial in the Washington Post, which shocked me, which frustrated me. And I think there are at least two things which comes up in my mind, which is that, North Korea continues to be a failed state. And one example of how North Korean economy is doing is, in the past 2 years, the exchange rate of North Korean currency, it in fact dropped 5 times. 5 times. Can you think about the impact? I mean, North Korea, in fact, imports large amount of its food, large amount of gasoline. All of its gasoline, but at the same time, pharmaceutical products. The price of all of them is going up 5 times, right? So North Korean economy continues to be a basket case. And this is what you said earlier today, Roxanne, which is that these days, national power, it in fact can be counted not only by military capability. We need economic capability. We need technology. North Korea doesn't have any of it. And then this conversation taking place in Washington, D.C., now North Korea enjoys far more enhanced position. We must be changing our, say, policy toward North Korean nuclear issue. That frustrates me. So could I get
my
your
reaction?
Yeah.
The first thing I would say, Ambassador, is I understand and I can hear your frustration. I mean, South Korea lives on the border with North Korea, in a state where there has never been an end to the war. The risk of conflict remains. Certainly, I will go visit your colleagues in the Ministry of National Defense later today. Remains, rightfully so, the organizing principle for military plans. We face a dilemma. I think all of us do. Here in Washington, around the world, in Japan, we should have the ambition and vision and aspiration of a denuclearized North Korea. And yet we also have to be clear-eyed about reality. What is the reality that confronts us today? The reality that confronts us today is, by all measure and level of information, North Korea has not just nuclear weapons, but the delivery systems to strike not just South Korea, but the region and probably the United States. That is the facts of the matter. And I've been out of government for a decade now, so I speak truly as with my own personal opinion. I think we have what we do and what we say have to also reflect that reality. And I think from a military perspective, there have been, I think, changes over the years that reflect that hard truth, right? Which has no true bearing on what a aspirational stated policy may be, but we would be doing our peoples a disservice if our military plans did not anticipate the fact that they are a nuclear armed state, which to tie a few things together comes back to your point about why the extended deterrence dimension of the U.S.-South Korea alliance remains so vitally important.
So one of the things which you emphasized to me, in your earlier speech today, was the importance of, say, supply chain, right? And then between our two countries, then a lot of efforts have been made in the past 6 months. Like, there was an MOU signed during President Trump's visit to Korea last October. And then there was something called the Pax Silica, to which only 8 countries were invited by the United States. So it was a very select group of countries. And then earlier this year in February, I think, there was something called Forge Initiative, to which 54 countries were invited. And this time, Korea was invited to continue to serve as a chair country. So all of those institutional developments are there. And I'm very encouraged about those developments. But at the same time, with those institutional developments on the one hand, but at the same time, I was just wondering how those institutions would be able to help us in the real world. And now you are the president of Asia-Group, so you must have clear idea about what should be done in order to deal with this issue of supply chain bottlenecks.
Well, I think it's going to be a vexing challenge for us, Ambassador, for years to come. And as I tried to express, this it has now for several years, but I think will be even more stark in the years to come. Is truly impacting every boardroom, every C-suite of a company that is involved in advanced manufacturing. And I think the opportunity here for South Korea across industry leaders, government leaders, is can they establish an alignment of purpose and investment, of policy and business strategy, right? That not only advance sort of what every responsible industry executive must, right, which is the health and success of their business, but also national interest. And we see this in other markets as well. We see that there are truly business opportunity, when you align with, strategic public policy. We see this a lot, for example, in India with Prime Minister Modi. And the rise of industrial policy has now for many years, at least for the last 6 or 7 years that I've been with my firm, the Asia Group, has had dramatic impact on companies across many sectors. And it's not just the ones that we read about every day, the chip manufacturers, right? There's a whole ecosystem here that exists in South Korea related to semiconductors, but also the consumers of semiconductors, right? And so, it's one where I truly believe, and we see this play out today, time and time again, that geopolitical considerations have to be a factor in the business decisions, right? The pure free trade, free market approach to commerce and industry in a number of sectors, not everywhere, but in a number of sectors, is something of the past. And candidly, in some sectors, where there is high competition and high impact on national security, there are choices to be made. Not necessarily black or white, but a recognition that, if you, just to give a very plain example, manufacture sensitive technology, that feed into, a Western supply chain. And you also seek to balance that with presence, business interests, investment in China for the Chinese ecosystem. That strategy in some sectors will be fundamentally, if not existentially challenged in the next few years. There are, in some industries, choices to be made. And that creates real dilemmas for certain companies, for certain industries. And we spend a lot of time trying to anticipate where national interest is going in Washington, D.C., in, for example, the Commerce Department in the White House, but also on Capitol Hill, as well as how we see policy and strategy play out in Beijing, because the Chinese are making similar calculus. So it is a feature, I think, of the world going forward that, arguably really didn't exist in the way it does today, even 6 or 7 years ago.
Well, Rexon, we spoke for about 30, 40 minutes.
Yes.
And after 30, 40 minutes, I in fact personally feel far more learned and then far more inspired.
You're very generous,
and then ready to go out and deal with all those problems in the world we're facing, right? And then I very much hope that all the Korean audience, they in fact would be learning as much as I did in this 30, 40 minutes of conversation with you.
Well, Ambassador, let me just take a moment here to thank you for your years and, if I may, decades of service on behalf of your country, your government, over a number of administrations, and for the Korean people and for the alliance. I think you've had a lasting impact on the interests, the well-being, the prosperity of South Korea. And I want to express my gratitude and appreciation. Every time I see you are prepared with thought-provoking and rightfully challenging reflections and questions. And I think I always enjoy speaking with you because I too leave conversations with you both with a deeper appreciation and perspective, but also more to think about.
Thank you.
And that to me is a sign of a meaningful conversation.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.